What's going on, human optimizers? I'm here with Layne Norton, who has a PhD in nutritional science and has a lot of swords for being all jacked and flexing and stuff and winning awards, being swole as shit. How you doing, Layne?
I'm pretty good, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. So yeah, tell us a little bit about your story. It's an interesting combination of the education and the science, as well as actually putting that into practice and performance.
Yeah, so the way I guess I always describe myself short term is I'm a science geek who likes to lift weights. Or can I curse a little bit on this podcast, or is that no go? Okay, yeah. I'm a science geek who likes to lift heavy shit, is what I say. So
yeah,
I'd always been into science a little bit. In fact, I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was young. You know, I wanted to swim with sharks. That was my thing. And as I got older,
have you swum with sharks? Have you completed that mission?
I did complete that mission. Yeah, I did complete that mission. So
good job.
Next one is I want to get in the water with a great white shark eventually. That would be pretty cool.
Okay, well, I'm glad we got this podcast done now. So
yeah, check it off the bucket list. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you never know, right? Yeah. So got to college, and at the same time, I was really getting into lifting weights. I started lifting weights when I was about 15 years old. I got picked on a lot as a kid. There's social hierarchy in high school and middle school, and I was at the very bottom rung of serfdom of the social hierarchy. So didn't get much attention from girls, got picked on a lot, and decided, all right, well, if they're going to pick on me, they're going to pick on a big motherfucker. So that was my plan. And
strategy.
Yeah, I was a very skinny kid. I was like 5'9", 130 pounds when I was a freshman in high school. So I started lifting weights for the non-honorable reason of wanting to be jacked and get more girls. And that slowly progressed into an actual love for lifting weights. And by the time I got to college, I played baseball through high school and was okay at it. I probably could have walked on to a team if I really, really wanted to do that, but I knew it wasn't going anywhere. I'm a 5'10" right-handed first baseman. I'm just not going to go anywhere with it. So I decided, well, I'm a very competitive person, mostly because I like to push myself. And I said, well, I got to have something to do. So bodybuilding was kind of the next logical step for me. And did my first show when I was 19. I got really into it. Was very passionate about it. And so I said, well, I really want to make a career out of this. And so, okay, well, what can we do? And I decided to pick biochemistry as an undergraduate because I figured learning more about the human body couldn't hurt me. And then about 3 years into my undergrad, I started thinking about graduate school because I realized I was going to be a quote-unquote professional in a year and didn't feel like I knew nearly enough. So I applied and got accepted to the University of Illinois under Dr. Don Layman, who is one of the foremost experts in protein metabolism in the world. In fact, one of the first guys who really did a lot of research on branched-chain amino acids. And worked under him for 6 years. And in that time, won a lot of bodybuilding shows as a drug-free, drug-tested bodybuilder. And then more recently, since about 2010, got into powerlifting. And turns out I'm probably better at that than I am at bodybuilding. I've won 2 national titles and in the 93 kilogram class, and was a silver medalist at the World Championships last year and set a world squat record, which has since been broken, but at the time set a world squat record at 668 pounds at 200. I think I weighed in at 202 pounds.
Wow.
So yeah, I have kind of done the whole gamut.
And has that finally helped you get chicks and be swole?
Well, I got one chick, my wife.
All right. Well, did it help?
Yeah, she did say that her first crush was Arnold. Her first crush was Arnold. So who knows? Maybe it wouldn't work out.
Impulse wasn't so far off.
Yeah, I mean, she probably had a cutoff of like, all right, if you're under 190 pounds, it's a no-go.
Yeah. There is a cutoff on the other side though too, because I hang with a lot of females, and when someone's too swole, it's like, come on, bro.
Although you'd be surprised, like some bodybuilders, like I would never get that big just because I'm drug free, right? But there are some bodybuilders who have like groupies, like who love a dude that's that jacked. But I mean, think about it, like, there's a type for every person, right?
That's true.
So that there's some people who purposely like who like obese people, and
Yeah.
awesome, good on you.
mean,
I'm a libertarian, man. So do whatever you want as long as it makes you happy. Doesn't hurt nobody else.
Yeah. If insecurity and steroids gets the panties wet,
That's I mean, that's I always tell people, I'm like, I have no ethical, like if somebody wants to do steroids, that's their business. I really don't care as long as you're not competing in a drug tested organization.
Yeah.
And people, I say, I hate to sound cliche, but stereotypes do exist for a reason. I mean, and overall, I had found that dealing with people in the non-tested areas, it tends to be a little bit more insecure, a little more, a little bit more of that, a little bit more bro meathead type thing. Even though I am myself a meathead, but
it's it's a difference. It's really why you're a meathead. It's like the difference between a girl who just really likes sex and then a girl who's having sex because she needs the affection. Right. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like there's a different nature to that.
Correlation versus causation.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the same with bodybuilders. Either they like bodybuilding and they like being strong and awesome, get as big as you want. Or but if they need it to feel more like a man and to cover up some inner insecurity, that's when things get a little squirrely.
Yeah, sure. And that's we have bigorexia, like there are people who so my business is I coach people, right? Mm-hmm. Like I was one of the first people, I don't want to say the first, but one of the first people to coach people online and kind of make that an actual business, and have been very successful with it. And I deal with people who are, that 99% of people would kill to look like them, and they'll sit there and say, I'm fat, I look terrible.
Right.
Like, what are you talking about? So it's actually made me have a better perspective on myself. When I start feeling insecure, I'll be like, all right, I can look the worst. I had an injury, I had a hip injury and a neck injury, and I wasn't able to really lift for about a 2-month period. And obviously lost a lot of muscle mass and lost a lot of strength. And I was feeling, very insecure about it. But I also was like, all right, well, this may be the worst I've looked in 8 years, but I still look better than pretty much everybody on the beach. So I'm not really going to worry about it too much,
It is funny how the mind plays those tricks, though, because I'll have a cold and I'll lose 3 pounds and I'll look at myself and be like, man, I'm skinny fat as shit.
Yeah.
It's funny how the brain will play that, and then you'll catch yourself and be like, come on, man, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, the people who matter don't mind if you're carrying a little bit less lean body mass. You know what I mean? If they mind, then they don't matter.
Yeah. Well, we touched on it, and it seems to be an issue that keeps coming up. And there's lots of stuff I want to talk to you about. But with your educational background and your experience as a natural bodybuilder, can you talk a little bit about the deleterious effects of steroids on the body? Because it's something that we're seeing quite commonly from even high school athletes all the way up through the professional ranks. So what is that really doing to the body?
Well, I think, there are some it's actually hard to say because, if you're looking at research studies, it's really hard to get like what we call an IRB, which is an internal review board, which reviews experiments that are done on humans to determine basically, are they ethical? Right. So we can't just go in and say, well, I really like to look at this. I'm going to slice this guy's arm open. Right. Because that used to happen, believe it or not. One of the actual classical studies on caloric restriction was done in conscientious objectors to war, and they basically starved them for 6 months. It was like super low calories, and there's no way that would have gotten past an IRB board now. But we're glad they did it because it'll provide us a lot of information. But IRBs are not going to improve a lot of experiments with steroids because it's a controlled substance, right? Now, some do get passed, but not in the doses that are being used by bodybuilders and a lot of athletes. So we can really only look at kind of case studies and look at what data we do have to try and determine what might happen. What we seem to know is they do mess with blood lipids. They seem to raise cholesterol. Some can lower insulin sensitivity. It does also depend on the drug. I do not consider myself a steroid expert, but just in general, we see those things. I think more to the point, I think that the risks of steroids have been largely overblown by the media. I think it's more about that type of person tends to be more prone to being addicted to things. And let's be honest, you can get addicted to damn near anything. Some things more easily than others. But there's people who are addicted to steroids. I remember reading a line by Flex Wheeler, who was a really great bodybuilder back in the day. He was runner-up at a lot of Mr. Olympias, won a lot of Arnold Classics. And he said at one point he tried training natural for like a 6-month period. And after like a few weeks of it, he goes, how the fuck do people do this? Because he loved the way he felt when he was on steroids because he was so strong. He could recover so fast, all those sorts of things. His joints felt better. But so I think a lot of the dangers have largely been overblown. I don't think you're going to, can you use a lower dose or moderate dose and be controlled and be under doctor's supervision and probably be largely healthy? I think you probably can. Mm-hmm. But I think that a lot of people get in that mindset that more is better, right? And you start combining steroids with insulin and growth hormone and all these sorts of things. And as much as somebody can be as much an advocate for steroids as they want, but if you take anything and take a really high dose of it, you got to pay the piper. Like there are consequences.
Yeah, I think you got to pay your taxes on something like that.
Exactly, and that's why I tell people with anything. I said anything that's going to cause some kind of big response in the body, there's going to be something else that you have in return for it. Okay, there's no free rides. There's a reason when those pharmacological drugs that come on that work, that do something, they also rattle off may cause diarrhea, this, and instantaneous death. And some people, I'm somebody who's not real sensitive to medication. Like I could take 2 Benadryl and I might get a little drowsy, but it doesn't really affect me. Mm-hmm. I took Adderall when I was a kid for ADD and I got a little bit more wired, but it didn't make me crazy. But some people, you give them like a shot of coffee and they're like bouncing off the walls, So I think that one thing we've definitely seen and I think this is where the future of nutrition is heading, is you're going to be able to see like different polymorphisms on genes and how they affect things, and say, hey, that person is pretty sensitive to caffeine or this or that, or doesn't tolerate lipids or carbs or whatever it may be, as well as the next person. We don't have that information now, but I think in 10, 20 years we're going to have it. And I think we're going to be able to see differences because as a coach, I mean, I've seen people who are the same weight, same height, same age, all that sort of stuff. And one person can like maintain their body weight on, 4,200 calories a day. And another person is like 1,800. I mean, what the hell causes that difference? That's an extreme example, but I have seen it. I have observed it. And so I think that understanding the nuances of metabolism is going to get us to a point where we can better prescribe nutrition interventions for people. And I'll give you a really good example of why I'm not a big fan of government, but I think government has a tough job in this aspect, or I guess they could just stay the hell out of it. But they have a tough job with regards to nutrition. Let's take the example of caffeine. We actually, when I was in graduate school, we had a guy who was an expert on caffeine come in and speak. Caffeine, people who tend to fall into 4 quartiles. And the first one is people who are slow metabolizers of caffeine who are very sensitive to it. And this is through polymorphisms on genes. People who are slow metabolizers of caffeine who aren't very sensitive to it. People who are fast metabolizers of caffeine who aren't very sensitive to it. And people who are fast metabolizers of caffeine who are very sensitive to it, right? So this is differences in liver and brain and heart. What they showed was that for people who were slow metabolizers of caffeine, so it's staying around the system longer, their liver works a little bit slower to get rid of it, and they were sensitive to its effects, it had almost the same risk factor for heart disease as cigarettes. But for people who were fast metabolizers who weren't sensitive to its effects, it actually had a protective effect on heart disease. So how do you make recommendations for a population as a whole when if you say don't drink caffeine or don't take caffeine, you are putting actually one segment of the population at risk. But if you say, hey, you should probably have a couple cups of coffee a day, you're putting another segment of the population at risk, right? So it's a really difficult thing to kind of work through. And that's where I think kind of the future nutrition is heading.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that people get frustrated about nutrition with is because you can hear 2 sides of the same argument and both of them can be true, and it's difficult to wade through that because the factor that that people aren't considering is that each human physiology is a little bit different and you're going to react differently depending on what you have going on. Right.
And, we're 99% genetically identical. And it turns out that we're a little less than more than 99% identical. Turns out that 0.1% makes a pretty big friggin' difference, to be honest with you.
Well, it's not only that, it's the epigenetic factors. I mean,
yes.
we're constantly upregulating and downregulating these different genetic expressions. So even
Absolutely.
if the substrate was initially similar, you know, what we're doing environmentally and consciously is
Absolutely.
changing those factors constantly. And, you know, that's one of the things that, you know, obviously our flagship supplement is Alpha Brain, and that's designed to, you know, boost levels of acetylcholine. We have an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor plus alpha GPC, and that has a different effect on different people. For some people, you know, they take Alpha Brain and it's like, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me in my life. And those people were probably running acetylcholine deficient to a certain degree, you know, and there's some people who can take a bunch of them and be like, yeah, it was pretty cool. And those people were probably super acetylcholine dominant. And then there's this whole range in between. And there's no way to know what a person's going to, you know, what effects it's going to have, similar to caffeine. You know, it's just, so you just recommend and make sure that it's safe for use across the board. And some people, it's just going to be like, nah.
Yeah, I think you have to look at, we call them Gaussian distributions. And that's, if you take a population and you subject it to any treatment, there's typically about 60 to 70% of the population will fall in a major range. And then, so it's kind of like this thing that looks like this, right? Like this, like a
bell curve.
It's like a hill. Yeah, a bell curve. It's exactly a bell curve. But you still are going to have people like way at the ends, right? And that'll be like 2.5% of the population will be at the ends. And so, or 5%, because they'll be at each end, you know. I mean, lifting weights is a great example of this. If you look at the spread, if you look at actual data points from, if they take people who've never lifted weights before and have them start lifting weights, you'll have people that'll go from squatting 200 pounds when they start for a max. In 12 weeks, they'll squat over 400 pounds, right? And then you'll have people who don't get stronger at all. Like, that sucks for them. You know, eventually they would get stronger, but I mean, it's just, you know, you just have a different range of responses to things. And it's, you know, I think that's why we need to, I always tell people, because coaching is what I do, right? So I'm trying to find what works for every person. I always tell people, science is a big blunt instrument. It's going to tell you what not to do. It's not usually going to tell you what to do. Okay. The coaching is an art form, and you've got to like look at these things. And so when I'm looking at like what I want to do, I'm looking at that Gaussian distribution for whatever it is and saying, all right, we know this works for about 60% of people. So let's start here, and then let's try to start massaging things out towards the ends and see where the optimal for this person lies, understanding that optimal is a theoretical thing we can never actually get to, right? So I think that a lot of people get frustrated with science because, you know, they'll hear one day caffeine is the greatest thing ever. It's protective on heart. It's good for your liver. It's anti-carcinogenic. And the next day someone will come out saying caffeine consumption is associated with heart disease. Yeah. And they'll say, okay, well, you know, I don't care about science. Well, I think a lot of the problems come from, honestly, correlation experiments, because there's so many confounding variables. I'll tell this to people, you know, like if you look at, let's take caffeine, for example, again. People who drink caffeine tend to be a more addictive type personality. They tend to be more likely to smoke, more likely to drink alcohol. And so those are huge confounding factors. You know, do we think that the caffeine is actually causing that, or it could be one of those confounding factors? Another example is meat consumption. We've been hearing recently that the World Health Organization came out and said, you know, we recommend keeping meat under a certain level. Meat consumption is associated with cancer and heart disease. Well, here's some characteristics of meat eaters. They tend to exercise less. They tend to eat less fruits and vegetables. They tend to eat more total calories. They tend to eat charred portions of meat, which actually are carcinogenic. And they tend to eat less fiber. And if you look at the type of cancers that people that eat, or cancers that those people get, it's, you know, intestinal cancer and breast cancer, prostate cancer. So intestinal, those are all three very energy-driven cancers. And so if you're having a confounding variable where there's increased calorie consumption because they're eating more meat, which has more fat, of course you're going to see that. But do you really think if you had leveled out their calorie intake, that you'd see the same things? And a lot of, you know, a lot of it just boils down to that when you correct for calories, a lot of times these associations go away. In fact, I'll tell people that about sugar. Like, people will get mad at me, but it's the truth. Sugar is associated with obesity, but if you look at experiments where they've actually directly examined high sugar diets versus low sugar diets and their effects on fat loss, if they control calories, it ends up being the same. Now, I always tell people, you have to understand the downside of that is sugar is not very filling. So it's easier to overconsume.
Well, it also has issues for gut flora, and there's a variety of other issues that are pretty well documented linked to sugar. So I don't think you can let sugar completely off the hook.
No, definitely not. And the gut stuff is probably lack of fiber intake, because high sugar diets are going to be typically lower in fiber.
Mm-hmm.
If you can correct for that, maybe you see a difference. But again, like, I'm using the extreme example to make a point. But with every gimme, there's a gotcha. So it's always, I always tell people, like, there's not really good or bad. It's just, okay, if I'm doing this thing, I got to understand that this thing is going to happen, right?
Sure.
So if I'm eating some sugar, I got to understand that it's probably okay if I have it in a modest amount, but it also means that it's not as filling as something that's fibrous. I might be more likely to overeat on it, and I have to understand that, know that about myself. And so I think a lot of what happens with a lot of information we get from the media is we lose context. We just say, oh, this is good, this is bad, and we go down that road. And in reality, it's like I always use financial stuff to kind of make comparisons, because I think people can visualize it a little better. If I go to a financial advisor, I say, hey, what investment should I do? And I give them no information. Are they going to be like, hey, yeah, this mutual fund right here? No, they're going to go, well, I need to know about, like, how much money do you have saved? Like, what are your goals? This, and like, there's 20, 30 questions they're going to ask me before they actually even get close to an advice. And I think nutrition should be the same way. Yeah,
I agree. And going back to what you were talking about with meat, people will lump meat in the same category, so some beef that's been shot up with hormones and steroids and antibiotics, and they'll count that the same as somebody eating, grass-fed beef, or something that's actually has CLA and other additional nutrients that you can't get from conventionally raised beef. And they'll compare those two same outcomes when it's really not the same. Same with, certain types of fish. If the fish is super high in mercury and super high in these other things, it's going to have other correlated effects that people aren't accounting for. And they do that as well with supplements. You'll read these studies, multivitamins don't work. Multivitamins cause this. Well, not all multivitamins are created equal. You can't just say that a multivitamin is a multivitamin like it's a commodity, like it's an iron ore or a gold bar. You know what I mean? It just depends on what forms of the vitamins they're using, what the composition is, what the ratios are. So there's a lot more to the story than the sensational headlines that you often read.
Well, and again, confounding variables. I mean, if you look at traits of people who are likely to take vitamins, a lot of times it's because they don't eat a diet that is conducive to health, and so they're taking a supplement because they're trying to replace that. So yeah, you confounding variables are always really important, and even with I'm not actually that convinced, and so this is what we may disagree, which is actually good, because that's good for discussion, that like organic meats are actually that much better based on the scientific data I've seen. Now, if you have grass-fed beef, you'll definitely have a different ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. That may have some benefits. Same thing for fish. And people will make the argument also that, it's better for the animal, it's better for the environment. And I got no problem with that. I think for most people, the one thing I try to caution people on is a lot of times when because I've been in the bodybuilding community for a long time, the fitness community, and I always try to step out of that for a second and think about, all right, how does the average Joe think, who's sitting behind his computer or reading a newspaper or whatever? And if they're reading about, you got to eat organic, grass-fed, no sugar, X, Y, Z, for a lot of people, that's just such a high barrier to entry. They just go, I can never do that, right? But if I tell somebody, hey, and everybody's different. Some people can't do moderation. They're not good at it. So in those cases, then that's where it becomes individual. But for a lot of people, I tell them, hey, listen, you can have a little bit of this stuff, but you just got to do it in moderation. You got to control it. Mm-hmm. If you can get organic food and you like it, great. If you can't afford it, it's still fine to do some lean beef, this and that, as long as you're controlling your calories, controlling your total intake, all that sort of stuff. And I think that when we do that, it lowers that barrier to entry and it helps more people out. Now, obviously, when you start getting up to that's why I tell people about supplements too, because full disclosure, I own a supplement company as well. I have a line called Carbon, and people will say, well, you don't need branched amino acids, or you don't need creatine. You don't need supplements by definition. You don't need them. Mm-hmm. But if for people, and I'm not going to tell anybody, hey, don't pay your health insurance, don't pay your rent, go out and buy my supplements. I'm not going to tell them that, right? But if you've got if you this is important to you, if your optimal performance is important to you, you've got some extra cash that you can spend on it, and it's not going to break your bank and that sort of thing, then do I think it can be beneficial for that last little bit of the pyramid? Yeah, sure. Of course I do. But again, do you need it? I mean, need is a very kind of cut and dry defined word as to where, need implies that you wouldn't make progress without it, which we know is not true. You can just go in.
There are exceptions to that. I mean, there's people who are zinc deficient or people who are vitamin D deficient, but that's usually the exception, not the rule. Most of the supplements are designed to take you from a state of good to a state of great, and really help you advance your performance. But occasionally there are things, and it's good to get a micronutrient profile to help you figure that out, because particularly with vitamin D, if you are vitamin D deficient, that will cause a variety of effects that you're not going to be too happy about. So there are some times where supplements can come in and really help you out. But I tend to agree with you as well.
Yeah, and vitamin D in particular, especially in people who are in northern states. I live in the sunshine state, so I don't have to really worry about it too much. But vitamin D is synthesized through sunlight, through UV light. So there's actually one of the consequences. Again, this is government unintended consequences. Not to go off on another government rant, but we've told people sunlight's bad. Stay out of the sun. Wear sunscreen. Don't get in the sun. Well, too much sun is bad. Absolutely, no question about it. But some sunlight is good because it's good for your mood. It's good for vitamin D synthesis. All these sorts of things. And what we've seen is a really almost an epidemic of vitamin D deficiency in northern states, because people are fully clothed in the winter, and then in the summer they wear sunblock and they don't get as much vitamin D as they normally would. And so, this is also the problem, is like once government makes a recommendation, heaven forbid they go back on it. So what really would probably be the optimal recommendation is, hey, get this many hours of sunlight per week is okay, right? Same thing with saturated fat. They demonized saturated fat for a long time, and there has never been one direct intervention study, not one, and they've spent billions of dollars trying to prove it, that shows saturated fat causes heart disease. They've never been able to prove it.
Yeah, they've actually now reversed that.
Yeah, in fact, there was a study that was conducted. Actually, I'll give the listeners a little bit of history, because I think you guys probably talk about this, but the history of this is very interesting about how saturated fat and high carbohydrate diets were pushed by the government. In the 1960s, there was a board that was established to work on stopping hunger, and they actually completed their analysis of everything and had $2 million left over. If you can imagine the government having money left over after doing something. And they said, well, let's look at this obesity problem. At the time, there was like less than 5% of the population was obese, but it was kind of an emerging issue. He said, let's look at this. Well, the senator that was in charge of that committee had lost weight on a very high carb diet, and it was prescribed by a physician to him that was very low in fat. And so all the research was biased right from the beginning. They were trying to prove this theory, and the theory was, okay, higher cholesterol is associated with heart disease, saturated fat increases cholesterol, so saturated fat causes heart disease, and it hasn't worked out. It just hasn't panned out that way, and it's
probably the same one of the greatest scourges to health in our human history is.
Yeah, well, I think if you get anything too high, I mean, if you get fat too high, there's enough calories, that can cause problems. If you get carbs too high, it's enough calories, it causes problems. Even protein, though, it's harder because it has a thermic effect. But I think it made us focus on the wrong things. Sure. We got focused on, well, we just got to lower our fat. We got to lower our fat. And we did that.
And everybody got fatter and had more heart disease.
Sure.
and their hormone levels dropped. And, we're still dealing with the effects of that. And it's funny, it goes really deep, because they've done those major analyses of all the data. come back and saying, actually, your body needs saturated fat, your body needs certain amounts of cholesterol, and it needs these healthy fats. But still, you'll find people in an older generation who don't, keep up with modern science, and it's difficult. And they're, we see them come into our academy all the time, and they're typically overweight, and convincing them to eat fat, it's like, it's really hard. Even when you show them the studies and you show them the reevaluations and you explain to them the science, it's so ingrained in them because they have this fat equals fat concept in their head. Like, dietary fat in your food equals fat on my body, when it's really, the reverse effects. In order to actually, manage your leptin and your insulin and all of that, it requires a certain amount of fat. And, but it's still, even though the science is reversed, some of those things are very hard to get out of the mind.
Yeah, I mean, my is a perfect example. Even if you know the science, my PhD advisor, Dr. Layman, I mean, he was telling his parents, no, you can eat eggs. It's okay.
Yeah, eat the
yolk. He's like, my mother still to this day will not eat an egg yolk.
Yeah.
Even though this man has done 60 years of, or sorry, I don't want to overdate him, probably 40 some years of research in nutrition, and has spoken like in front of Congress. His mother still won't eat eggs because she's worried about the cholesterol.
Yeah, it's a perfect example.
Yeah, and in fact, that's programming. That shows how powerful propaganda can be. Yeah, and no I think also, with regards to cholesterol as well, cholesterol is mostly a familial issue. If you have high cholesterol, it's very difficult to modify your blood cholesterol much more than like 10 to 20% through diet. You can, if you eat high fiber, low fat, low cholesterol, you can get it down a little bit. But if you're somebody who runs at 300, you just have really high cholesterol, you're gonna need a drug that will lower that. But I would actually say
though, I'm not even sure that the science is even supporting the correlation between.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah. Is that here's the deal is plaque that gets in arteries is made up of cholesterol, and I'm not a heart disease expert or anything like that. This is just my understanding of things. Plaque is made up of cholesterol. But unless you have damage to the endothelial lining of your blood vessels, plaque just doesn't start randomly accumulating because you've got high cholesterol. Now, would it be a greater risk factor for somebody who has some kind of endothelial damage if they run higher cholesterol? Then maybe, yes. Mm-hmm. So if you're a smoker and you run high cholesterol, maybe it'd be good that if you're on a statin or something like that. But even those statins have such really bad side effects. I really try to, encourage people to try and modify as much as they can through lifestyle. And in fact, exercise is going to be your biggest thing because exercise protects your blood vessels. It makes you better at blood delivery. Like exercise is like a vaccine against disease, essentially. Mm-hmm. It's giving you a controlled dose of a stressor and allowing your body to handle it. And your body just gets better. In fact, exercise is so powerful. We had people who were borderline, they were metabolic syndrome, borderline type 2 diabetic. I didn't conduct this study, but it was a study going on in Dr. Layman's lab when I was there. And they took them at overweight, obese, and they had them run kind of a zone type 30-40-30 diet. So not even low carb, just, moderate carb, and exercise 4 days a week. And in 4 weeks, their blood profile did not even, you couldn't tell that they were metabolic syndrome. It had completely corrected their blood profile. And so exercise and diet are that powerful that you don't even need to lose that much weight. If you just correct your lifestyle, you're almost all the health benefits you will get. And we've seen this, like you can have people who are fat but fit. I mean, you see this in martial arts. I mean, look at some of the guys who are
Roy Nelson.
Yeah. He's got good cardio. Like people will joke about it, but he does. Like for a super heavyweight, he's got good cardio. Like he doesn't gas out, And you see some guys who are shredded and they're like, they're gassing after one round, So it's you can be fat but fit, like it's possible but it's lifestyle modification.
Yeah. So let's talk about, before we hop off here, we talked a lot about nutrition. Let's talk about how you got that monster squat. So let's speak to some meatheads out here who are looking to increase their powerlifting. So what was kind of your regimen? What was your strategy? What's your workout? Tips that can help people get there.
So I follow what we call something called daily undulating periodization, and a lot of what I do comes from Dr. Mike Zordos. Matt Gary, and my personal coach, Ben Escrow, those three are good friends of mine, and I consider some of the foremost experts at, if you want to get bigger and stronger, these are the people you need to follow. So basically what we're doing is we're undulating rep schemes throughout the week. One day I'm doing a higher rep day, a moderate rep day, a lower rep day. Obviously, as the reps go down, the intensity is going up, the weights are going up. But I started off, I probably got to about a 600-pound squat, only squatting twice a week. To go from 600 to 650, I had to go up to about 3 times a week. And to go from 650 to 668, I had to go to, for at least a short term, 4 times a week. So you can see that, people will talk about overtraining, but what you have to understand is that overtraining, what is considered high volume for me right now, or what I considered high volume 4 years ago is low volume for me now. Mm-hmm. Like, you can train recovery, right? So the first time we ever went in and did a squat, what happened? We were sore for like a week and a half, right? Like, we couldn't even move. You couldn't even, like, if you went down to sit on the toilet to take a dump, like, you weren't coming up for like another half hour, or or you needed like the elderly handrails on the toilet. You know what I mean? Right. But what happens? We lift weights and we get better at it. And it's the same thing. People think soreness is equated with growth or with recovery, and that's not necessarily true. Because what I'll tell my bodybuilders, I'm saying, well, if you're worried about being sore, go out and run 10 miles. I promise you'll be sore. But do you think you grew muscle? No. So actually, I hardly get sore anymore at all when I train, just because my body is so adapted to such high frequency that I just recover faster. Now the one downside to that amount of volume and frequency is you get dinks and dunks, you get injured. Same thing you see with fighters. Like, fighters, one of the biggest things is can you stay together? And it's not about will I be injured going into a fight. You're gonna be injured going into a fight. It's about, can I actually be like upright? Can I actually? Right. And same thing for powerlifting. I heard one fighter say, to practice to fight, you have to fight. So guess what happens when you fight? You get punched in the face, you get armbarred, you get injured. Yeah. But you have to do that, because otherwise you will not have the skill to actually hurt someone. You'll be in fantastic shape and you'll feel good, but you're gonna get your ass kicked. You know what I mean? Because that other person has been practicing that skill. Well, it's the same thing in powerlifting. In order for me to go and do a really heavy 1-rep max, I have to go lift heavy weights frequently and get really good at that skill. And so, you go in dinged up. And so I would say one of the biggest things in powerlifting or long-term success in bodybuilding or powerlifting is finding a way to get all that volume, that frequency, that intensity, and stay relatively injury-free, right? Because you can't make progress if you're not in the gym. And, whereas, if I take a day off because my hips aren't getting open and I have some lower back pain and all this kind of stuff, I take a day off, or I push it back a day, or have a light day. Does that really hurt me? Probably not that much. Whereas if I had gone in and tried to force through it, ended up, tearing something or, herniating a disc, now I'm out for 6 months or 9 months or a year. That really set me back, right? So I think managing those things is really important. But I guess what I would encourage people to do who are listening, if you're really interested in this stuff, is to go look into daily undulating periodization, DUP, and look up stuff from Dr. Mike Zordos, Matt Gary, Ben Escrow. They're all going to have I have some good information out there on bodybuilding.com about this sorts of training. And basically, there's never a one-size-fits-all like we talked about. But for me, taking a scientific approach to training and honestly being willing to, at a certain point, you can have all the science you want. You just got to be willing to sack up and do what it takes. And, when I look back at my training the week before Worlds and even like leading into that, I look at it now because I've actually been out. I've actually had a hip injury, so I've been out for a little while. I'm coming back now. But I looked at those 4 weeks of training. I go, God, how in the fuck did I do that? Like, now that I'm out of it, and I'm not actually in it, like, God, how did I actually do that? Like, I was in the gym for 4 hours, and it was like brutal. Every rep was brutal. But, when you want something that bad, sometimes that's what's going to take. So, yeah, having science and all that stuff on your side is great. But there's something to be said for just putting your head down and grinding.
Yep. I like it, man. It's a good way to wrap this thing up. How can people get in touch with you, my friend?
Yeah, so the best way to get in touch with me is my website, biolayne.com. I also have a customized dieting site called Avatar Nutrition, which generates basically just real short. You go there, you enter in your data or your user data to begin with, and it will generate nutritional recommendations for you based on your goals and where you are currently. And then it will adjust those each week based on how you progress. And it's less than $10 a month, $9.99 a month. So for people who can't afford a personalized coach or a trainer, is a great option. But my website's the best way to get a hold of me. And then I'm on all social media, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. You can find me in all those places as BioLayne. And then on Facebook, it's facebook.com/Layne Norton.
Beautiful, my friend. It's good to meet you and hang. If you're ever in Austin, make sure you come on by.
Yeah, definitely will. I like Texas, so you might find me out there at some point.
All right. I look forward to it. Take care, Layne.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
Yep. See you, everybody. Peace.